Hi, I'm Ross Bentley.
I'm Jeff Braun.
And this is No Dumb Questions.
Dumb questions.
Well, we'll see about that. We'll see if there's any dumb answers.
Right. There's no dumb questions, but you got both of us on the line here. The answers could be totally not cool.
And I think that this episode, we've got a couple of questions that could lead to definitely some dumb opinions, because there's some opinion type questions here this time around.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I got one for you, Ross, then. Actually, I say I'm smart. Actually, Toby sent us a question. It's, I think, pretty good. So anyway, he says, how do I give better feedback to someone helping with the setup? We do 4 to 5 WRL races a year. Even with that seat time, my mental bandwidth seems limited. How do I decide what to focus on in order to give good feedback? Yeah, that's good.
Well,
that's good.
The biggest thing I think there is my first thought there is, and first of all, I'd say, Jeff, this is as much of a question for you as it is for me. I mean, the feedback is going typically to the person that's tasked with making the car handle better. But sometimes we know, and I'm pretty sure there's at least one person listening to this podcast who is the driver, the engineer, the mechanic, the transport driver, the sponsor, and hospitality, catering. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So to me, the more you break things down, the more easy it is. I think one of the mistakes a lot of drivers make is they think they've got to come in and give this incredibly detailed bit of feedback. And, it's like, well, a car does this in this corner and a car does that in that corner. And, or they come in and go, the car oversteers. Well, where does it oversteer? That, so to me, there's kind of and you and I have, I think, used this one before, but, the very simple question is just, if you could have the car do one thing better, what would it be? Just one thing.
Yeah.
And I think if you can kind of dig into just that one thing, it's a great jumping off point, rather than trying to, it's the old, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right?
Right. It's, and you're exactly right. I think both of our debrief sheets will have that. What's the one thing you want the car to do better? Someplace in the debrief sheet, if not the very first line. And I can even carry that a step further. I've had the opportunity in the last 4 or 5 years to run some Ferrari Challenge drivers, and they're less experienced. They're new to the sport and things like that. So they're not pro guys who are used to giving good feedback. And sometimes I ask them that question, what's the one thing you want it to do better? And they're not even sure what they want it to do better. They're not sure if it's understeering too much or if it's too scary getting into the corner, or they're really not sure. And I'll just say, look, what's the one thing that frustrates you personally when you're driving the car the most? What frustrates you? There's got to be something where you go, oh, every time I put the gas on, the rear tire spin, or every time I turn the wheel, it doesn't turn as much as I want. I wish it would just, that bugs the heck out of me. To me, that answer is all you need. I think, Toby probably is trying to be super scientific and say, well, the rear rebounds too much and the front's diving too much and the rear most engineers don't want that. And if you're the driver and the engineer and all the things that you said, just pick one thing that frustrates you. I guarantee you didn't go out there for that session, that race or whatever, that WRL stint, and just go, wow, that car was on rails and it was perfect. Something bugged you the whole time. That's what you tell your engineer, your mechanic, your buddy, or yourself, and then focus on that.
And I think it's important to be the driver at that point in time. Don't try to be the engineer at the same time you're driving. Just your job as a driver is simply to report what the car is doing. It's not to, I want more more rebound in the dampers. I mean, it don't, and even if that is your job to eventually do that, separate those jobs. Just really focus on what it is, and use the, what frustrates you. The other way that I've done it also is, well, if you just turned a 1 minute and 40-second lap time. What would it take to do a minute 39?
Yeah, that's great.
And it's like, well, I need to get back to power earlier coming out of the corners. But every time I do, the back end kicks out on me. Okay, we can fix that, right?
Yep.
If I could just carry a little bit more speed into that one corner, well, okay, you can fix that. But I think the single biggest mistake, I think, is drivers try to skip the what the car is doing and immediately go to the fix. And
I agree.
The more you can drill down into the, okay, what's a car doing? It's understeering. Where is it doing it? In turn 3. Where in turn 3? Middle of the corner, actually the entry to the corner. Okay. What are you doing when that happens? Are you turning the wheel, turning the wheel more? Are you still coming off the brakes? Are you off the brakes? Are you on the throttle? And the more you kind of just dig down into that, eventually you go, oh, well, there it is. Like it's kind of easy to fix then, right? Well, easy.
Exactly. Well, but then if you do that, and you and I have done this, you as driver, me as engineer, or you've done it as you as driver coach with a less experienced than yourself driver and me as engineer, but you dig that down and suddenly the engineer might go, oh, I can fix that. And the driver or driver coach might go, oh, no, whoa, we can fix that.
Yeah.
And you come up with where that problem or the frustration is, and maybe help each other out. You're like, hey, I can give you a little of this and you give me a little of this on the driving side, and that frustration will go away.
And the other piece there, I think, is you need to also be honest. And if the driver says, if you as a driver says, the car's okay, that's okay to say that. Like, don't pretend that you are super engineering test driver man, or woman,
Right.
There's first of all, it's okay to say, I don't know. And, one of the things that I'll often tell a driver or ask a driver to do is I said, make the car show its weakness. And because if the car isn't showing any weakness, sorry, Jeff, you don't have anything to do.
Right. Exactly. I'm going to show how bad a parent I am, but Colin, who was out, we're in these very young days karting, and we were working on setup stuff, and he came in and he goes, wow, Dad, the thing is like perfect. It doesn't do anything. It's not oversteer, understeer. He was like 8 years old or whatever. And he says, it handles great. We don't need to change anything. I slapped his visor shut and I said, go drive faster. Because if it's perfect, you're not driving fast enough. Now that's bad parenting and telling your kid that he's got to go faster. But it kind of is. If the car was like perfect, you just said, what would it take to run a 39? That's kind of getting you to go a little faster. What would happen? And in your case, you might be, okay, that's perfect. A 39. Oh my gosh, it would never turn in the middle of that high-speed corner and I hit the wall. I don't know. I can't do a 39. Well, you've just answered what needs to be changed on the car to go faster.
Yeah, and I've also done that. What would happen? And you taught me this is like go to extremes. Like, okay, what would happen if you went into that corner 10 miles an hour faster? Which end of the car would go off the track first? Okay, and sometimes it's just a gut feel that, like, you may not even recognize that the car is understeering or oversteering. But if you go, well, if I went in the corner 10 miles an hour faster, or I got onto full throttle 3 car lengths earlier, the thing would just plow off the edge of the track. Okay, the car, the weakness is the front end of the car.
Right. What's holding you back? The weakness. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I will say too, that you can help yourself. So me as an engineer, I have I have this luxury. I don't have to drive the car, thank God, because we'd be terrible. But
I don't know, but I've seen you in a champ car race, pretty damn quick. So yeah.
Okay. Well, I get to have these highly paid drivers, and they go and I make a change, and they're good at giving feedback. Toby asked about giving feedback. They could probably comment on 15 different aspects of the car because they're that sensitive and hyper aware of what the car is doing when they're driving it. But if I make a change to try to fix a problem that we're trying to work on, the last thing I'll say before they leave pit lane, and okay, so we're on an intercom, so I'm not broadcasting into the world, but I'll say, okay, we went softer, 100 pounds on the front springs to try to help you with that understeer. See if it helps in turn 7 where it's bugging you. And then he leaves pit lane. So I've pre-programmed him to be hypersensitive to that particular thing. And with some less experienced drivers, I'll say that same thing. And I'll say, that's the question I'm going to ask you when you stop here again. I'm going to ask you, did it fix the understeer? Was it better in turn 7? And you stay out on the track until you have an answer for that. Then come to the pits and tell me the answer.
Yeah. So one of the things I think, if you're listening to this, you can take away from what we're talking about here is the biggest thing is asking questions. And I think the mistake a lot of people make is they might ask one question, what's the car doing? And then they stop there. And I think what you're doing, even telling somebody what you're going to ask them, gets them primed for what the answer they have to come back with. They know what they need to go looking for. And that really, really helps. But the important thing is, and one of the things that I know because I've seen you do this is I have seen some people say, okay, we went softer on the front springs, so that should eliminate the understeer. Well, you've I don't know what's the right word. You put it in the driver's head. This is what's going to happen. That's what the driver should expect. It's really important the way you worded it in that I'm just going to ask you, is it better? Did it fix it or is it worse? And then it's just up to the driver, then just to report on what it was.
Right. But he's got so many things going on out there that, I want him to make sure that he brings me that answer back. He might have 10 others. He might be like, yeah, and the rear wing's flopping around and that guy cut me off and the session ended and I never got tire pressures up. He may have all of those, but by God, he needs to answer that one because that's what we're working on. And that's, I think if you're your own engineer, you need to sit there and when that guy flags you out off the false grid onto the track, you need to ask yourself that question. Okay, now I changed this. This is what I hope it's going to fix. Now I got to really make sure I pay attention to this because I want to get my money's worth. As race cars are expensive per lap, I need to get this answer and get my money's worth. So here's what I'm going to ask myself when I stop.
So Jeff, can we kind of turn this question around a little bit and talk a little bit about how great a parent you were and how I helped you maybe a couple of times in what we did with Colin at times. But what made one of the things that has contributed to Colin being so good with his feedback. And, let's just say that we did some things to the car to make the car do some bad things. And he, first of all, learned how to explain what the car was doing, but also, okay, then how can you drive around that as well? That was really...
Right. Yeah, we're going back to that bad parenting thing. You're not supposed to take the rear wing off your kid's formula car and just say, okay, now go drive it with no rear wing on it. Send it. And it might be a little loose. You'll see when you get to the first 120 mile an hour corner. Yeah. Wow. We're going to have child protective. Fortunately, he's old enough now. They can't come and get me. But yeah, I remember when we did that. Take the front wings off the car. Did the same thing. And it, talking about hyper sensitive to things or hyper aware to things, and you did it, you were doing it from a driving standpoint. Okay, what happens, Colin, if you knock the front wings off the car by bumping into somebody or something and you can't pit because there's 20 minutes left in the race? or, any of those things. I mean, we're getting a little off on tangent, but it's on that whole Team 16 thing, you had them drive the car without using one of the gears. Well, they were sensitive to how they were shifting and how they were clutching, and it became very aware of exactly how the gearbox was and how they were braking and where they were doing things because they had to skip a gear.
Well, and I think, it leads to one of the takeaways listening to this is something else that you could take away from this, I think, is, when you go for a practice session or, a lot of drivers, you don't have the luxury of a full test day, but you get some practice sessions. And typically what happens in those practice sessions, you go out there and you try to turn the fastest lap you can possibly do. Well, what if you did, some sweeps? You just went up with the front tire pressures 4 PSI and did some laps that way. And then you did the rears that way. And then you disconnected the rear bar and you tried a bunch of things. And the more you do that, the more, in the middle of a race, you're going, wow, that feels like the time that we disconnected the rear bar. And then you get on the radio and you go, man, this thing is really kind of ugly. It's pushing really bad. And at the end of the race, they look and go, oh, the rear anti-roll bar link broke.
Right. And that reminds me of something. I'll tell a quick story here and then we'll move on, I suppose. But the good drivers that I've had do something like this. We'll make a change. They'll go out and they'll say, oh, yeah, it's still, I'll make this up. It still understeers and it understeers like this. It seemed to help it a little bit on the entry, a little bit, they're hyper-focused on what it was. And they're giving good feedback to the question I told them I was going to ask. And then they'll say, and this is where it gets really good, but I found if I do this with the brake and I get off of it here and I hold it a little longer, it really reduces that problem. It doesn't fix it. If you can fix it, I'll go faster, but I can kind of drive around it a little bit by doing this. Man, that helps the engineer a lot because now I'm like, okay, so if he lets off the brake sooner, it's less and it does this. And then I can look at the data and think what the car is doing dynamically and figure out how he drove around it to make the car so he doesn't have to drive around it. But we've got two things. One, if I can't fix it, he knows how to deal with it in the race. And if I can fix it, his feedback is helping me understand what he was able to do to fix it. And I can change the car. It's a big thing. So, your whole thing about driving around problems, I always say, because it gives me an out, driver, you're never going to have the perfect race car. So you better figure out how to drive what you got. And you will say, yeah, the engineer is a complete wankety wank. He's never going to give you a good race car. You better figure out how to drive it.
Yeah, because rule number one as a race car driver is always blame the car.
Always the driver.
Yeah, right. Well, okay. So Jeff, speaking of blame, let's switch to our second question of this episode, okay? And this one is going to, it's probably one of the most controversial things in motorsport in quite some time, and it's very timely. Greg asked, F1 Abu Dhabi, how would you have called it in context without the benefit of time and hindsight for Red Bull? And then, he kind of said, I think that's an easy answer. Mercedes, race control, and, he wants to hear, he has his opinions. He wants to hear our opinions. And I'll preface this with, these are our opinions. So
right. Our opinions. Yeah.
Which are pretty much worthless in this case.
Right. None of those guys on the list called me to ask what I thought. Did they call you? Total Wolf? No?
Well, my phone was ringing and I kind of ignored it.
Oh, right. I saw that Christian and Toto, and I just ignored those two. Yeah.
Yeah, I had one from Michael Massey at one point, but I just ignored that. So.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. So how do we start this? Well, I think that like Greg said, Red Bull. Let's start Red Bull. For me, as a strategist, so I watch Formula One races. I watch all races probably really weirdly. I watch them as if I'm like, oh, don't pit now. Oh, stay out. Oh, you need to save fuel. You're 40 laps from the end. You need to be saving. I don't care whether it's an Indy car race, a stock car race, a sports car race, Formula One race. So I have my thoughts. When the whole thing happened, we'll call it the last 5 laps or whatever that was. First of all, let's get this out of the way. It was Nicholas Latifi who crashed, right?
Yep.
The Canadian.
Yep.
He did not do it on purpose. He should not have death threats.
That is the most disgusting thing I've ever seen in my life. But yes,
insane.
Yes.
So we'll get that out of the way. I don't think that's going to be too controversial of a comment. So when Latifi crashed, red comes out. You're Red Bull. I was immediately, because Greg said in context, without benefit of hindsight, I said immediately to my TV, okay, you're Red Bull, you got nothing to lose. You definitely pit. You pit and get tires, because Lewis is on 50 lap tires. If it doesn't go back to green, you're going to be second. If it does go back green, you got new tires against Hamilton. Maybe there's 5 cars in the way, maybe there isn't, but it was like a low risk, no brainer for them.
Yep.
Okay. So then Mercedes is the tricky part. Lewis Hamilton looked like, I don't know, pick your guy, Jimmy Johnson on a green-white checker with 5 laps to go in a NASCAR race. It's like there is no right answer. You are screwed. You do not want to be the leader. You come down for tires and nobody else does, and suddenly you restart in a NASCAR race 20th. You don't take tires, everybody else does, and you restart first on old tires and everybody behind you's got new tires. Lewis was, now you could add in the fact that maybe it doesn't even go back green and you pit yourself out of the lead and lose the world championship because you thought it would go back to green. So I actually think Mercedes did the quote right thing also. I mean, there wasn't really any other option for them. So to me, and who am I to judge Red Bull and Mercedes strategy? But I find it hard to fault either one of those guys. What do you think before we get into race control? What's your thought?
I agree. I mean, for Red Bull, it was a no-brainer. For Mercedes, it was a brainer, but in the end, it really wasn't, because logic said that one of 2 things were going to happen from an official's perspective. It was going to they were going to keep it going on behind the safety car, and it wasn't going to get cleaned up, and it was going to finish under a yellow. Or they were going to red flag the race, in which case everybody comes in, and because F1 has the stupidest rules in the world that under a red flag you can change whatever you want in the car, they'd all start on new tires, and then it would be a new race.
Right.
So from Mercedes' perspective, it was the right call. There was nothing else they could have done anything different there.
Yep. And I'm a little confused, probably a lot of confused. But to me, if that was an American race, the minute the yellow came out, they would have closed the pits. So everybody has an equal opportunity to pit. So, it's not one of those deals where where Hamilton went by the pits and then without an opportunity to pit, and then Verstappen got a chance to come in. To me, and I'm not sure that, I was a little unclear. I'm not sure it got screwed up because of that, but I know in Formula One, the pit closing is kind of weird, and not everybody always gets the same opportunity to pit, which might have contributed. Because if Hamilton, in an ideal world, Hamilton could have come in with Verstappen behind him. They would have come in together. They would have got tires, and they would have come out together with Hamilton still leading with new tires and Verstappen behind him. I don't think that opportunity was afforded them, because I think Hamilton had already passed the pits when it went yellow and Verstappen got a chance to come in. I could be wrong on that, but it's another thing where I think Formula One needs to close the pits equally so that nobody can gain an advantage by having an opportunity to pit when the others didn't. But anyway.
Yeah, I agree.
So now on to race control. I said,
Jeff, can I stop? Like, with race control, the very first thing I'm going to say is that has to be one of, if not the worst jobs in the entire universe. Like as much as I don't agree with the decisions that have been made by the officials in Formula One this year, it's also a terrible job that if they came and said, we will pay you $1 billion to take that role, I'd say it's not worth it.
I'm with you 100%. So Bo Barfield is the race director in IMSA, and I deal with Bo, as you do too, a lot. And I tell him that all the time. I say, there's the guy with the worst job in racing. And he smiles. And I think he's going to take you up on your $1 billion offer, though. I'm pretty sure Bo, your phone will ring. It'll say Bo on there. He'll take you up on that. But man, that job is terrible because I've told this to Bo. I've said, so at the end of the weekend, your good weekend is when a limited number of guys come and complain to you. But how many of them come up and say, wow, awesome job, and give you a trophy and you get the spray champagne, and that never happens to those guys. That job sucks. That's terrible. Terrible. So in America, we kind of know, we as in the people running the strategy and races, we know that they IndyCar, NASCAR, IMSA, they want to finish races under green. NASCAR has their green, white, checkered overtime thing. IndyCar, we've seen them actually red flag the Indy 500 to clean it up so that they could go finish it under green. IMSA has all sorts of procedures with 30 minutes to go in the race where yellows are shortened intentionally. They close the pits. You can't pit. They can clean up quickly and get back to green. So my thinking was they want to end this race under green. They don't want to just putt around and have the world championship in this race decided by, under yellow. What surprised me is that they didn't put the pass around cars, the cars in between, because that's standard procedure, I guess, for Formula One. They normally get them out of the way. IMSA does the same, most sanctioning bodies do. And they usually do that on the lap before, they cross the start finish line and send everybody and then go green the next lap. Well, they didn't have time to do that because they were going to be out of time. So they sent them and went green. And that was cool because that they got back to green and they had a full lap of green racing. And you kind of, if I was sitting in the scoring stand of either one of those teams, I would be like, man, these guys are going to do whatever it takes to go back racing. And I would factor that into my consideration. Now, that's if I was in an American race. But Formula One, I don't know that there's a precedent. I certainly don't follow it that close enough to know what the precedent is, other than that they have passed everybody around, and it seems like they were urgently trying to finish under green.
So I'm going to kind of step back and give the opinion on the race control / F1 officials and that whole thing. And, certainly in hindsight, I mean, and it's way easier, right? But, and I think maybe because, you use the word precedent, there hasn't been a lot of these situations in the past, but why wasn't the decision made that as soon as that crash happened, everyone could look at it and go, look, there's 5 laps left. We can't get this thing cleaned up in that amount of time. Red flag it. And even if it got back, so there was 2 laps of green or 3 laps of green, that would have, and both Hamilton and Verstappen on new tires, that would have been good racing, entertaining, and it would have been good for the sport. So there's that. So we can question why that wasn't done, and maybe because it's never really been done that way before. It's not the first thing that comes to mind for those officials, whether that's Massey's call or it's these group of stewards, which I actually think is the bigger problem in F1.
The stewards.
They have these 3 stewards, and they're different every race. And I think that's the problem is, the calls have been so inconsistent all season long. The Lando Norris, Sergio Perez at the Red Bull ring, when Perez tried to make the pass around the outside, Norris is still on track, Perez goes off track, Norris gets penalized for that. Like he should have moved way offline to allow Perez to come back on the track. And I'm not so sure Perez could have come on with the speed he was carrying. But the bottom line is Norris got penalized for that. You go to Brazil, you have Verstappen on the inside, Hamilton on the outside. Both of them go off the outside of the track, and there's no penalty. That is totally inconsistent. And the problem is that you've got three stewards one weekend looking at that going, that's just good racing. Another weekend going, no, that's wrong. And you take this last race at Abu Dhabi, the first lap of the race, Hamilton, depending on whether you're a Hamilton or a Verstappen fan, you see it in two different ways. The bottom line is Hamilton went off the outside of the chicane, cut through, and gained an advantage. And the rules say you cannot gain an advantage by going off the track. And he did. But he didn't get penalized for that, whereas in other races, they would have been penalized. So I think that's the bigger problem. And I don't know what goes on in race control at an F1 race. One of these days we should get Scott Elkins, our buddy, on here, and because he's been Massey's and he's been that race director at times.
Yep.
But like I don't know if the steward said let the race run out, or if the steward say don't red flag it. I don't know whose decision that is, but the bottom line is I honestly, I think the FIA / F1, whoever makes these decisions, they need to make some changes, because I think while the sport and definitely F1 in the US North America has just skyrocketed in popularity, and controversy is sometimes good, and it brought a lot of attention to that last race. So you could say it was good for the sport. On the other hand, there are people that go, this is a joke. This is silly. So,
yeah, I mean, I think you're right. And I think it gets down to that consistency and the expectations. I keep thinking back to how we do it. Sports car racing had its periods of inconsistency in officiating and things like that too. And,
without naming any names, I won't name any names.
Right. Without naming any names, they'll be down in the comments below. Yeah. I think the one thing that's good about IMSA officiating is that Bo makes the decisions. And so maybe not the first time fan doesn't know this yet, but the teams, the people who running the strategy in the teams that have been there week in and week out, they pretty much know how Bo's going to do things. And you can base your strategy based off of that. I mean, he'll do things which are fantastic for the sport, the teams, the show, and everything. I mean, there'll be a car in the wall, and it's in a safe spot. Safe as in the driver's not in harm's way. No other car's going to crash into him, but he's stuck, and we're going to have to go retrieve it with a wrecker because you can't run the whole race that way. But generally, right now, it's not on fire, all of that. And what he'll do is he'll leave the pits open, and he'll allow every car to have the opportunity to pit before he closes the pits. And then he'll close the pit. Well, that makes the racing better. Nobody gets screwed up. Nobody gets the opportunity like I talked about when somebody else didn't. Everybody gets a chance to make a pit stop before we go under yellow and circulate under yellow for 3 or 4 laps to clean up the mess. Everybody knows that. That's consistent. He'll do that all the time. I think in this Formula One, if everybody knew the cars were going to get passed around, and if everybody knew they were going to make every effort, like you said, maybe even red flag the race to start again, then nobody would probably have any complaints with what race control did. I doubt they really care what race control does, as long as it's consistently enforced across all cars and consistently enforced week in and week out. I've always said, I don't care what the rule is, just as long as I understand it, it's going to be enforced all the time and everybody is subject to that rule. Then I don't care.
and I've heard you say that before, and other engineers say that, like, if you allow people to cheat a little bit, then be consistent with letting them cheat a little bit. But don't let them like cheat a little bit and then a little bit more and then bring them back again. Just be consistent all the time. And that's all any racer really wants, is just be consistent. And we can work with that. So, and I think, I would say, this is one of the more interesting, enjoyable season of Formula One, because you saw the two best drivers battling it out all season long, sometimes doing some questionable things on the track. But the only thing that I think, kind of soured the season for me personally was the inconsistency of the officiating. And that's a shame.
Right. How many times, I'm old. I won't say you're old, but you're experienced too. How many times did we go back and go, wow, you just thought Prost and Senna, you went, okay, this is what we want. Yeah. And let them battle it out. So yeah, it was good. So anyway, it'll be interesting to see what they do in race control.
Yeah. And I'll make one last comment and then we'll wrap it up. But, the one thing that did surprise me a little bit was on that restart, they go through turn one, they go through the little sweeping turns, and they come down to the big long, the new variation of the big long kind of 180-degree corner. Hamilton didn't defend the way I thought he should have.
Wow. Yeah, it was, especially blocking in F1 is kind of like, yeah, it's a given. That was, he seemed like he made that a little easy, but who knows? Yeah. You know Verstappen was going for it. All the wheels were going to fly off of both cars if it had to. Yeah.
And I'll say, on that first lap, when Verstappen sent it into the chicane on that first lap, I'm like, whoa, he pulled that off.
Right.
I was like, oh, well, that was great stuff, Yeah. So I love seeing that stuff. And, it was good racing. I would say it was really good racing with a couple of little hiccups by both drivers all year long. And, I wouldn't be the first to say either one of those guys deserved the world championship. And unfortunately, some things happened that, from a pure racer's perspective, kind of soured a little bit of it for me. But hey, that's my opinion.
Yep.
And we'll leave it with that, I guess, right?
Those are dumb answers, right?
Yeah, well, in fact, this one is maybe even dumb opinions.
Dumb opinions, right? Dumb opinions, right? Dumb opinions. We'll go with that. With that.
Yep. Well, Jeff, let's wrap this one up. And again, if you've got other questions, send them to us. We might answer them. We might not. Hey, we're dumb.
Right. Exactly. You can hit me up on Instagram. It's Mesa Vista Coffee is on Instagram. And Ross, you got a couple places.
I'm at Ross Bentley on Instagram and Speed Secrets on Facebook. So post some stuff there and we'll see if we can come up with some dumb answers for your great, smart questions.
Sounds good. Well, everyone have fun. That's the whole point of it.
Yep. Until the next one, keep learning, having fun.